It's time for the Phil Ferguson Show.
This is Phil Ferguson, and you are listening to the cleverly titled The Phil Ferguson Show, where I get to talk about whatever I want, but I pitch it two different ways when people ask. One is I talk about money and atheism, and that's a real crowd pleaser. The other one is sometimes I will say that the show talks about religion, politics, and money, the three things you should never discuss with your family members. And maybe you can. Maybe your family is cool and you can have conversations about how all that stuff works. But I like talking about those topics, so that's why I have my show. Later on, we are going to have a really nice and long interview with Joshua Bowen, and he has just recently published, I think it was a couple months ago, a book called The Atheist Handbook to the Old Testament, Volume 1, and it is a delightful read. I have the audiobook version, which is read by my good friend Seth Andrews. So absolutely delightful book, and we're going to talk all about that and all about Joshua and other books that he has written, some about religion and some about ancient Sumeria and ancient languages. Very, very interesting stuff. I think you're going to like it a lot. The Investing Skeptically segment is going to be on, I guess, what type of account you should use. People often ask me, should I put money in a traditional IRA or a Roth IRA? Well, like a lot of things with investing, it depends. So I go over some of the thoughts of IRA versus Roth IRA versus a 401k versus a 403b. And maybe in some cases, it might actually be convenient or the best for you to put money in a taxable account. So I go over some of those ideas. And of course, all of it depends on the specifics of your personal situation, because I'm never giving specific personalized investment advice to any listener. You have to be a client for that, and we have a contract and all that stuff. Other things that are going on, we are remodeling our kitchen. And when I say we are paying someone to remodel the kitchen. Although yesterday, Sunday, my wife and I spent the vast majority of the day putting things back where they belong, because everything had to leave the kitchen. Every drawer, every cabinet had to be emptied. They were all taken down. The entire kitchen stripped down to the drywall, the floor removed, everything gone. And on Facebook, I put a few pictures, but maybe I'll do a complete before and after sequence at some point when it's all done. A few weeks ago, the floor finally got put in. The cabinets got put in. Countertop is now on, and it's gorgeous, absolutely gorgeous. And Sunday, like I said, my wife and I were putting stuff back. So we have boxes of stuff all over the house that were in all of the cabinets, and now it's a process of putting it all back. So we were working on that, and I shared a photo of the new section of the cabinets that have glass doors. So I thought that looked pretty cool. It's partially filled, but we're going to be doing that over the next couple of days, and then soon it comes painting, because the ceiling was kind of hacked apart and patched and redone to change the lighting. So we have better lighting for the kitchen with some really cool LED flush mount lights in the ceiling that have very, very high diffusion. So it's not like a spotlight where it comes down in one part. This light goes everywhere. So the lighting is more powerful, at least more effective at lighting the entire kitchen. It is absolutely delightful. So we still have to put everything back, and then the backsplash goes in and around the kitchen, and there's some decorative elements and a few more lighting fixtures that are yet to be hung because they would be in the way. But Lots of stuff going on there. The other thing is kind of more ranty, I guess, just COVID. Almost a year and a half ago, a year and 3 months, 4 months ago, I was very concerned that as a country, we lacked the ability to handle COVID-19 properly. There are people who still think it's a hoax. There are people who think it's like the flu still, or some like a snake bite. I don't know. The comparisons that were made over a year ago are so comically ridiculous. They were then too. You couldn't point it out to somebody that it was comically ridiculous, because telling people that several 100,000 people might die just in the United States alone is beyond their ability to comprehend. And for some people, it's still beyond their ability to comprehend. I have actually talked to people that have said things like, I'm waiting to see the long-term effects of the vaccination before I go get it. And the response I've got, and I borrowed some of this off of other posts I've seen on the internets. And when someone tells me that they're waiting for more data, I said, what data specifically are you waiting for? And of course, they give you a blank stare. And I'm like, no, really, what is it? Is it the death rate from the vaccination? Is it the fact that 100 million people in the United States alone have gotten it? That's a third of the population, half of the population. That's not enough. I mean, what's the number that you're looking for? Is it 6 months? Is it 12 months? What length of time are you looking for? Because I'm going to bet, and I may be surprised, someone may have actually thought this through, but they're just saying they're waiting because they're scared. Whatever reason they're scared of it. Maybe it's because they watch fucking Fox News. Maybe they just don't get how vaccinations work because they got a whole bunch of them when they were a little kid, and they didn't get a lot of these famous historical diseases like smallpox and polio because they got vaccinated. So we're losing our focus, our awareness. We're losing our awareness, a collective awareness of how bad some illnesses can be. We've even had some related family members. There are a couple steps removed where one of them, I'm going to be really generic with this, but one of the relatives died from COVID, and they didn't follow the rules and had a funeral. And people at the funeral then spread COVID because somebody had it there. And one of the people was in the hospital for a few weeks and got better, but now suffers from long COVID, where you have long ongoing symptoms, maybe for the rest of your life. That part we definitely do not know yet. And another one got sick enough to be put into a medically induced coma. I think that's the way you say it. Forgive me if I've messed that up. And they stayed that way for over a month and then passed away. And so that sucks. And there's people that know stories like this that still will not go get vaccinated. The 600,000 plus dead, the tens of millions of people that have gotten mildly to extremely to mortally ill. I don't get it. I don't get it. And then, of course, I was worried that when the CDC came out with the sudden and unexpected announcement that everyone who's been fully vaccinated may now travel around the country without a mask. While probably scientifically accurate, apparently they did not take into account humans and the average American. Because if you're fully vaccinated and you can now go out without wearing your mask, that's cool. However, the people who are vaccine hesitant, many of them don't want to wear a fucking mask anyway. And of course, it becomes a declaration of stupid if you're wearing the mask, because if you're in the 30% that haven't gotten vaccinated yet, you don't want to be the one put out, forced to wear a mask, because it's all bullshit. So as soon as the CDC announced that rule change, of course, I think it's obvious that everyone is going to say, fuck it, and nobody's wearing a mask. Well, maybe if we have 90% of the population fully vaccinated, that would work. But we're something about 70%, maybe 70% have one shot, 50% fully vaccinated 2 shots, or Johnson & Johnson, and then 2 weeks. So it's not high enough for everyone to go around without a fucking mask. But that's what we're all doing. And so I was hoping to be able to travel. We actually had our eyes on getting plane tickets to Italy, because look right here. You can hear those? Those are our new fucking passports. While everything was down, and we couldn't go anywhere anyway, we renewed and signed up for our passports and got 10-year renewals. And then the EU, the European Union, reduced their rules for travel restrictions. And as long as you have your fully filled out CDC official white card, that takes place of the European green card for vaccinations, and we could just fucking fly to Italy. And of course, for me, I can't just, at least not yet, I can't just buy a ticket and go tomorrow. I've got appointments and I've got obligations and I've got things that I got to do. So, we're looking out a few months into the future, and I don't want to buy a plane ticket and book accommodations for 2 to 3 to 6 months from now, because I'm worried that all the stupid people that won't get vaccinated aren't going to go out, aren't going to wear masks, and it's going to get bad enough that the European Union says, no, people from America, you can't come over because you're too fucking stupid on average. So there is that concern. There are, of course, some places within the United States where vaccination rates are 30% or lower that are now getting spikes, because 70% of the population is a lot of fucking people, and they're getting sick and they're spreading it because everyone's given up on wearing masks and social distancing pretty much everywhere. And of course, the places where they're giving it up on vaccinations is the same place they're giving up on wearing face masks. So it could be a really long summer that turns into a bad fall, autumn. So if you haven't yet gotten your vaccination, please, I'm begging you, go get your vaccination. The vaccination and any and all side effects that it may or does actually have are way less than getting COVID. So from a personal level, you're better off. But from a society level, I love it when people say, I'm going to take personal responsibility. So if I get sick, that's my fault with COVID. Really? Is that what you're going to do? You're going to take personal responsibility? Does that mean you're going to pay every and all medical bills for yourself? You're not going to use your insurance? You're not going to rely on Medicare? You're not going to do that? And of course, if you are shown to give it to somebody else, you're going to pay their bills? Is that what you mean? You're going to take personal responsibility? Because I don't think you understand what personal responsibility is. Personal responsibility is taking care of yourself so that you can protect others. That's responsibility. That's what a loving, caring human being does. This, I'm not going to get vaccinated and fuck everybody else, that's the antithesis of personal responsibility. So please, go get the vaccination, because we definitely don't need this to keep spreading, and we definitely don't need it to have more and more opportunities to mutate and become something worse. I don't know how this got to be so hard in this country. France, as an example, just said, yeah, you don't have to go get a vaccination, but if you want to go to a club, a restaurant, a bar, you are going to have to. You will be compelled to show that you have a vaccination. I think the United States should do that. I know it's not going to happen. It's just not going to happen. Not in this country, not at this time frame. But there should be a mandated, required card. If you don't want to leave your house, if you don't want to get vaccinated, fine. Fuck you. Take personal responsibility and sit your ass in your house and pay for shit to be delivered to you. That's personal responsibility. If you don't want the shot, stay the fuck home. But we should have a card that you have to show to get into a bar or a restaurant or a concert or a sport ball event thingy. But I don't think that's going to happen. I just don't see the will for it. I think the average politician, one side or the other, doesn't want to take that on because it's going to be unpopular. And we're kind of already used to a bunch of people dying. So whatever. We're just going to continue with that. All right. That was more rant than I expected. But some things that are going on. We're going to take a quick break. And we're going to talk about IRAs, Roth IRAs, things like that. And then after that, delightful interview with Joshua Bowen and his brand new book titled The Atheist Handbook to the Old Testament, Volume 1. Can't wait to hear Volume 2. So hang in there. We'll be right back.
Section 1. The Origin of the Bible. A few wandering families, poor, wretched, without education, art, or power, descendants of those who had been enslaved for 400 years, ignorant as the inhabitants of Central Africa, had just escaped from their masters to the desert of Sinai. Their leader was Moses, a man who had been raised in the family of Pharaoh and had been taught the law and mythology of Egypt. For the purpose of controlling his followers, he pretended that he was instructed and assisted by Jehovah, the God of these wanderers. Everything that happened was attributed to the interference of this God. Moses declared that he met this God face to face, that on Sinai's top from the hands of this God he had received the tables of stone on which, by the finger of this God, the 10 Commandments had been written, and that in addition to this, Jehovah had made known the sacrifices and ceremonies that were pleasing to him, and the laws by which the people should be governed. At that time these wanderers had no commerce with other nations. They had no written language. They could neither read nor write. They had no means by which they could make this revelation known to other nations. And so it remained buried in the jargon of a few ignorant, impoverished, and unknown tribes for more than 2,000 years. Many centuries after Moses the leader was dead, many centuries after all his followers had passed away, the Pentateuch was written, the work of many writers, and to give it force and authority, it was claimed that Moses was the author. We now know that the Pentateuch was not written by Moses. Towns are mentioned that were not in existence when Moses lived. Money, not coined until centuries after his death, is mentioned. So many of the laws were not applicable to wanderers on the desert. Laws about agriculture, about the sacrifice of oxen, sheep, and doves, about the weaving of cloth, about ornaments of gold and silver, about the cultivation of land, about harvest, about the threshing of grain, about houses and temples, about cities of refuge, and about many other subjects of no possible application to a few starving wanderers over the sands and rocks.
You're listening to The Bill Ferguson Show.
This Investing Skeptically segment is about Roth IRA or traditional IRA. It's a question that I am asked all of the time, and it's, I guess, depends on the situation, but all things being equal, a Roth IRA is likely better than a traditional IRA. But it depends, and it's very specific to your situation, and it's something that maybe you could ask your tax professional to run as an example through their tax software to see what the effects are. Generally speaking, with a traditional IRA, or often just an IRA, you get to deduct the money that you put in from your income. So if you add $5,000, $5,000 is removed from your income and you pay less tax. Now, if your tax rate is really low, say 10%, you would save $500. If your tax rate is really high, well, you know what? If your tax rate's really high, you're not going to qualify for a traditional IRA anyway, but maybe you could save 20-25% if you don't make too much. With the Roth IRA, if you put $5,000 in, you don't have any tax savings at all. You just put $5,000 in. Now, the nice thing is that with the Roth IRA, that $5,000 can grow to become $10,000, $15,000, $40,000, $50,000 over a very long period of time. And you get to take all of that money out in retirement and pay no tax on all of it under current law. Now, people always ask me, why do you say under current law? Because under current law is a slight warning to you that things can change. We don't know the future. Matter of fact, right now there's been talk about changing the tax rates again, which, okay, we need to pay the bills. Taxes may need to be higher. Are they going to change income tax rates? Are they going to change capital gains tax rates? And it has been thrown around, but not seriously at this point in time, that maybe there should be a 15% tax on just the gains in a Roth IRA when you take the money out. So, of course, the first big question is, if you did a traditional IRA, do you qualify for a traditional IRA? And what would be your tax savings? So you should at least know that number. If you put money into the Roth, what do you think your tax rate's going to be in the future? And that's hard. That's hard to know. You can make some guesses. Are you saving up a big chunk of money and you're probably going to have more money in retirement than you have now? Are you going to have less money in retirement than you have now? Because one of the ideas for IRAs is that while you're working and can save 25 or 30% tax on the money you put in the IRA, in retirement, when you're pulling the money out, you're living on a smaller budget, or at least a smaller relative budget, and the taxes that come out at the end would be lower. And of course, in the meantime, you've not paid any tax on any of the appreciation or any of the growth and all those things. So that's nice. I mean, either one is probably better than a taxable account until it's not. And these are the kinds of things I know drive people nuts. But if you are in a situation where, let's say you're getting close to retirement, a few years away, and let's say you have $1 million between your company 401k or your 403b, some IRAs, some Roth IRAs, but you're kind of actually cash on hand poor, and any of the accounts you take money out of, you're going to have to pay taxes on. So you're in that situation. The neat thing about a taxable account, again, under current tax code, which, by the way, I am not a tax professional, so I'm just talking about ideas as I see them. Always double check with your certified tax planner. And of course, this is the summer of 2021. The rules may be different if you're listening to this in the year 2022, as an example. If you put taxable money into a taxable account, just a conventional brokerage account. You can buy individual stocks, mutual funds, ETFs, just like an IRA, whatever you want to get. You pay tax on all that money because you earned it. You have to pay earned income tax. But then you could buy, let's say, the total stock market index fund from Vanguard. You put $10,000 in there, and then 10 years later, you take out $20,000. The $10,000 you put in, you already paid tax on. The $10,000 in growth, you would pay, again, under current rules, 15% on the gains, on the appreciation. You would pay long-term capital gains tax rates. If your combined income, if you're married, or if your individual income, single, is low enough, the capital gains tax rate on the stock appreciations could actually be zero. So that's something to check out if you're in a lower income and you think you're going to be there, but you just happen to have some money that you can save and invest. If you qualify for the 0% capital gains tax rate, you might be way better off paying tax on the money today and then letting it appreciate. Now, the dividends along the way in this taxable account will be taxed. Well, it depends. It always gets complicated, like income, but a lot of stock dividends are now called qualified dividends, and they also, when they're qualified, they qualify for favorable tax treatment of some kind, which means probably they're going to pay long-term tax rates, capital gains tax rates, even though they're dividends. And this is something that you can benefit from, even though this was probably created to help really rich people who make their living on appreciation of assets and dividends from assets instead of labor, so they get a cheaper tax rate than people who work. But again, depending on your situation, you might be able to have an investment in a taxable account grow, pay favorable tax rates, qualified tax rates on qualified dividends, and then when you take the money out, you only pay capital gains on the appreciation. If your capital gains tax rate is zero, to me, that sounds pretty fucking sexy. If your capital gains tax rate is 15%, keep in mind that any money you take out of an IRA, you might pay 20, 25, 30, plus state income tax, depending on your state. If it's a gain, if it's appreciation, part of it might be 0%. But if you make too much money, good for you, you make too much money. But then the next tier is 15%. on long-term capital gains, which could be dramatically lower than the 25 plus, 30 plus that you might pay on money you take out of an IRA. So if you're getting closer to retirement, 4 or 5 years, 8 years maybe, and you're really heavily invested or really heavily invested in IRAs, 401ks, Roth IRAs, things like that. As soon as you retire, you're going to have to start taking money out of those things, IRA and 401k at least, and start paying taxes on them. If you have some of that money in a taxable account for at least a year, maybe a couple of years, you can take things out paying only capital gains tax rates. And that would allow you temporarily for several years to delay taking money out of IRAs and 401ks and avoiding those taxes just a little bit longer. So there's always ways that you can do this. And this is one of the things that people often don't do with their tax professional is sit down and go over some of these things. Explain to them where you have money. Throw out these ideas that you might be hearing through this segment. And they might go, oh, yeah. And you want to kind of get them in a mode where they're thinking about ways to reduce your taxes in total, not necessarily an event. Because if you say, is it better for me to do a traditional IRA or a Roth IRA? An accountant, a tax professional, will often go and answer that specific question for you. They can get very, very focused, like most people, I guess. You ask a very specific question, they will give you a very specific answer. So you want to be able to sit down and have a conversation with your tax professional. One of the other wacky things that just came up with one of my clients, and I've talked about this before, but I think it might have been a while. They were in a situation, well, let's make it generic. You're married, there's two of you, and you have a child who's about to go to college. Maybe because of circumstances, or maybe because you followed some of my other suggestions, and you've not really saved for college, which gets my seal of approval for most people, by the way. It's a whole nother segment. But now you need to reduce the amount that you're saving for retirement to cough up 20 grand a year for 4 years for your student to help them pay college. Now, of course, maybe they get a Stafford loan for $5,000. Maybe they get a loan for $5,000. Maybe they make 10 grand during the college year to help pay the bills themselves. Maybe they borrow a little bit of money, but you've committed to some part of that bill, and you have to change where your money is being allocated. One of the things that's important to remember is from a tax standpoint, your income is fungible. All right, well, what does that mean? Fungible means that money from here is like money from there, and it's all the same. It's all money. So something that you might be able to do is instead of just turning off your 401k, where you're putting 20 grand a year, and pulling out of your taxable account because that's easily accessible, you could keep putting money into the 401k. I may have said that wrong. So most people think I'm going to not sell my investments and I'm going to stop adding money to my 401k. And that may be the right answer for you. However, the better answer for you might be to continue adding money to your 401k and now start taking money out of your taxable account and paying taxes on your gains. And at first thought, that sounds weird, but the money you're putting in your 401k, again, depending on your tax tiers, you might be avoiding 25, 30, even 40% tax, depending on your income level and the state that you live in. And the money that you're pulling out of your taxable account, you might only have to pay capital gains of 15 to 20% in tax. And so it creates a situation where you're spending down from the taxable account while still putting more money into the 401k, which later becomes an IRA. And again, instead of just stopping the 401k and spending that money, you keep the 401k and you spend the money in the taxable account. This, of course, assumes you have money in a taxable account. It assumes you have a reasonably good job. It assumes you have income. It assumes that you're well on your way to retirement, because if you're way behind, you may not be able to help your student very much. Of course, you could help them all you want, but when I get those phone calls from people who are 55 or 58 and they say, I've now helped and paid for all 4 of my kids to go through college so they have absolutely no debt, and now I'm ready to start saving for college, or I'm saving for retirement, starting today at the age of 57. Well, that's going to be that's going to be really hard for you to do. You need the time. So you need to start saving really early and hopefully a lot of money. And if you don't have a good paying job, that all of that becomes hard, if not impossible. But if you have good income and you have a generous portion of your portfolio in a taxable account, consider not turning off your contributions to your 401k. Keep doing that, especially if you get a match. You must always collect the free money. And then you can spend money from the taxable account creating a tax bill. That's absolutely true. You're going to create a tax bill. But the tax bill you're going to create is likely lower than the tax savings you're going to get by continuing to put money into the 401k. And so you're adding money to a qualified account. So, boy, I sure hope I explained that well, because that's a lot of stuff. But the short of it is, if you have questions, check with your tax professional, schedule an appointment off season, like now, the summer or the fall. They have other things that they do during the year. They don't just sit and wait for you to come back next February, but they're not slammed before April 15th trying to get things done. If all you're doing is dropping off a box of papers to your tax professional and paying them to figure out what you owe, yeah, you can use software to do that yourself. I mean, it still might be a good idea to hire somebody because they can find something that maybe you didn't think about. But the real advantage of a tax professional is sitting down with them when they're not slammed and going over ideas. Pay them for their time. They are tax experts. They might think of some way to do something one way or the other. Make sure your questions are open-ended so that you're not asking them a very specific question, because they will give you a very specific answer. But make sure they know what's going on in your life. Talk to them, and maybe they can do some calculations and give you a couple of examples, even things that I haven't thought of because I don't know your personal tax situation. So there's some ideas and thoughts about IRAs, Roth IRAs, 401ks, where you should put the money and when. And the answer might not be exactly what you think it is. And of course, always keep in mind that tax codes change over time. So don't make a big bet only one way if you are going to be hurt by a change in the tax code. So think about that too. I hope that helped muddy up the waters enough to make you interested in going and looking, trying to figure out how to maximize your long-term portfolio, your wealth for your family, whatever it is. Hopefully it gives you some ideas to think about. The Phil Ferguson Show is for educational purposes only. Nothing said on the show should be interpreted as personalized investment advice. Your investments should be based on your situation, and you should consult with your financial advisor before taking any action. The show may contain ads. These ads are placed into the show by the hosting company after I finish recording and editing. I have little control over the content of the ads, and you should not assume that I support their products or claims. If you choose to support the show via the new Patreon page, that support does not create an advisor-client relationship.
It is now not only admitted by intelligent and honest theologians that Moses was not the author of the Pentateuch, but they all admit that no one knows who the authors were, or who wrote any of these books, or a chapter, or a line. We know that the books were not written in the same generation, that they were not all written by one person, that they are filled with mistakes and contradictions. It is also admitted that Joshua did not write the book that bears his name, because it refers to events that did not happen until long after his death. No one knows or pretends to know the author of Judges. All we know is that it was written centuries after all the judges had ceased to exist. No one knows the author of Ruth, nor of 1st and 2nd Samuel. All we know is that Samuel did not write the books that bear his name. In the 25th chapter of 1 Samuel is an account of the raising of Samuel by the witch of Endor. No one knows the author of 1st and 2nd Kings or 1st and 2nd Chronicles. All we know is that these books are of no value. We know that the Psalms were not written by David. In the Psalms, the captivity is spoken of, and that did not happen until about 500 years after David slept with his fathers. We know that Solomon did not write the Proverbs or the Song, that Isaiah was not the author of the book that bears his name, that no one knows the author of Job, Ecclesiastes, or Esther, or of any book in the Old Testament with the exception of Ezra. We know that God is not mentioned or in any way referred to in the book of Esther. We know, too, that the book is cruel, absurd, and impossible. God is not mentioned in the Song of Solomon, the best book in the Old Testament. And we know that Ecclesiastes was written by an unbeliever. We know, too, that the Jews themselves had not decided as to what books were inspired or authentic until the 2nd century after Christ. We know that the idea of inspiration was of slow growth, and that the inspiration was determined by those who had certain ends to accomplish.
You're listening to The Bill Ferguson Show.
Okay, everybody, it's time for the interview. I'm so excited. Today with me I have Joshua Bowen, who is actually an MBA. No, not an MBA, PhD. God, sorry about that, Joshua. PhD, and I'll let him give all the titles because I can't even read some of the words in his titles, but PhD, and also went to Liberty University. So, Joshua, welcome. And just because I started there, let's talk about your educational arbe vitae? No, that's a tree. What's curriculum vitae? What do they call it now?
Oh, curriculum vitae.
Curriculum vitae. Arbor vitaes are trees. Those are really sexy trees, by the way. But tell us about your educational background.
Yeah, I appreciate you having me on. I'm looking forward to it. So I joined the Air Force when I was 17, having done pretty poorly in high school, primarily because I just assumed that I was dumb, which, I mean, it turns out it still may be true, but I started on active duty, and that gave me a lot of time, a lot of downtime to focus in on something that the Air Force really wanted us to do, and that was get an education. So I started doing my bachelor's degree from Liberty University, which they had at the time the best distance learning program that I could find.
No, I'm just want to make sure. I want to make sure who we're talking about. Is this Oral Roberts, Liberty University? No,
I think Oral Roberts is
Tulsa.
Is Oral Roberts? Jerry Falwell.
Jerry Falwell. So this is the religious everything I'm going to think of when I hear Liberty University.
Right. Yep, that's right.
All right.
Very, very conservative.
Excellent. Continue. My apologies.
No, it's fine. So, I got my bachelor's in science in religious studies. So, took all kinds of classes on different books of the Bible, and of course, I grew up an evangelical fundamentalist Christian. So, those were very easy classes to take. I studied Greek a little bit while I was there, and when I got my degree, I really wanted to become a chaplain, and so in the Air Force. So I enrolled in another very fundamentalist evangelical seminary, which is Capitol Bible Seminary, and got commissioned as a second lieutenant in the Air Force. Excuse me. And one of the things that was really nice about the seminary that I was attending, which was just outside of D.C., was that they were very, very focused on biblical languages. So, started off with biblical Greek, then went into biblical Hebrew, then Aramaic, Akkadian, Ugaritic, Syriac. You name it. If they offered it, I was taking it because it was incredibly important to me that I have the ability to handle the text as much as possible in its original form. And it turns out that I wasn't too bad at languages, which
nice.
Which was neat. Yeah, it sort of resonated. It was finally good to be doing something that I was good at.
It's always a nice feeling.
It was novel for me. So when it was a 6-year degree, it was 126 semester hours,
Wow.
graduate program, so it was a very big degree. Had to write a master's thesis and everything. And the last 2 years that I was there, I had done so well with Biblical Hebrew and Aramaic that they asked me to teach at one of the satellite campuses their 2-year graduate Hebrew program, language program. And so the combination of, I got out of that degree with a 4.23 GPA or something, so something pretty high. And that, in addition to my master's thesis and the fact that I had some teaching experience at the graduate level, got me a slot at Johns Hopkins University in their what's called the Assyriology program. So it's in the Ancient Near Eastern Studies department. There are Assyriologists, so the study of ancient Iraq, Assyria, Babylonia, the languages and cultures of that region from about 3000 to 300 BCE. And but also in the department were Hebrew Bible, so Hebrew Bible, Old Testament studies, archaeology, Egyptology, art history from the ancient Near East, all those things. So it was a really great place for me, given my background. And I graduated with my PhD in Assyriology with a minor in Hebrew Bible in 2017.
Wow, absolutely fantastic. Do you think that all these ancient languages, now I don't know if you can speak them, read them, write them, you share whatever you want. Did all that studying help you get back closer to what would be original texts and original languages and provide you a greater understanding of what was trying to be communicated in the Jewish texts and Christian texts?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So to answer your first question, ancient languages, are some of them, like Biblical Hebrew, for example, have very close ties to modern Hebrew, but from intentionality, I think, more than anything else. But most, ancient languages, Sumerian, Akkadian, Ugaritic, Aramaic, these languages are, dead languages, so they're not really spoken. I'm sure that somebody could reconstruct it and try to speak it, but they're not living languages in that way. They're mostly coming from written documents.
Right.
And so, however, given that Biblical Hebrew is so close to modern Hebrew, I actually learned modern Hebrew before I learned Biblical Hebrew, and it was incredible how much that helped me because I wasn't coming at it strictly grammatically. It would be, if we were talking before that Italian, and it's so different when it's a living and spoken language, because sure, you're learning grammar, you're learning syntax, how do you form the verb, and how do you make a subject, and how do you make it a predicate, and all those things. But if you're able to actually speak it, you can go hang out with some people and order coffee and have a conversation about the weather or something. It gets into the brain in a vastly different way than just trying to learn it from the grammar and then trying to read it. So that learning modern Hebrew really helped me in that process. But
nice.
As far as accessing, the ancient world and the biblical text in particular, so the Hebrew Bible and the Greek New Testament, there's no question. I think it's absolutely essential if anybody's going to try to engage with the text in its the earliest copies that we have of it. I think knowing the biblical languages is absolutely essential. And what was neat for me is that was where I started. I wanted to be able to really be the best Old Testament scholar that I could be, which is what led me to apply to Johns Hopkins, because they have this amazing Assyriology program, which is where you learn Akkadian and Sumerian, which are sort of the languages that form the cultural background to where the Hebrew Bible found its origin. And so, learning those languages made it all the more, eye-opening to me, how much you could get at what the original authors were working with, and the traditions that they were pulling from, and the points that they were trying to make, or at least in the canonical form of the text, what was trying to be made. It was really amazing for me. So it was a good fit. It was a good fit for me.
I like it. And there's, of course, certain things that from studying a language you can learn about how they use the language that you would never know not studying the language. I'll make a comparison for me in Italian. Almost always when they use the future tense in Italian, like if someone's talking to me and telling me something about the future using the future tense, it becomes very questionable about whether that thing is going to actually happen or not. It's it almost conveys an expectation of doubt or uncertainty. And if you know you're going to do something, you would use the future tense and then include some kind of designation of a future timestamp. Like I go to the supermarket tomorrow means I'm going tomorrow. But if I say that I'm going tomorrow, the listener might be like, but
right. I see.
Yeah. So the future tense is used very different than it is in English.
Yeah, that's very interesting. And it's definitely, those sorts of nuances I think are missed if you're speaking the Bible, if you're just reading the Bible in English.
Yeah.
This is why I think pastors are able to get these study Bibles or get these commentaries, and to have new sermons, fresh sermons every week, because there's if you don't know the original language, even though the pastors might not be getting the nuance right all the time, they can always say something like, oh well, if you understood this in the original Hebrew, what they're trying to get at is, and there's enough diversity, I think, and a distinction between how the English is translating the original that can hold some, at least have some verisimilitude or something.
Absolutely. And before we get too far into it, I want to let listeners know that you have, we're going to talk mostly about the newest book, but you have a couple older books, I guess. One, I love this, Learning How to Pray in a Dead Language. Okay, cool. That sounds like a pretty small subset of people that might be interested in that. You have maybe a little bit more populous, if I dare say that, Learning to Read Ancient Sumerian, which I'm assuming is not a large number of people want to do that. And then more closely related to the topic today and included in the new book, did the Old Testament endorse slavery? And now the newest book, which I guess, is this only like 6 to 8 months old?
May 28th, I think. So even less.
2 months old.
Yeah.
And this one is called The Atheist Handbook to the Old Testament, by you, of course, Joshua Brown, Volume 1. I love that. It's pretty presumptuous, I'm assuming.
Yeah.
You've got plans for volume 2 through 10?
So,
yeah.
Yeah. We'll see.
And of course, it's available on all good booksellers and probably in person. And I did get the audiobook version. I kind of feel like I paid Seth Andrews to read it to me. So, because he actually did the voice for it, but he did the reading of it. He did a nice job.
Yeah, he really did.
So tell us about that book. Before I get into that, it was a beautiful question that you asked in pre-show, which there is no recording saved from pre-show. Just like saying pre-show. You and I were talking about reference points and perspectives, and I don't want to speak for you. So what is your perspective on religion and the Bible in a general sense, and then we can get into this book?
Sure. So I got saved, if that means anything to the audience. I'm sure it does. When I was 5 or 6 years old, and I was raised in an evangelical fundamentalist Christian household, very conservative, and went to church 3 times a week and twice on Sunday, and that was sort of my upbringing. And I went to, as I mentioned earlier, I went to school specifically to develop that that faith and to be able to articulate it and understand it better. And then ultimately, when I went to Johns Hopkins, I was confronted with a lot of the historical background to the biblical text and the inconsistencies and problems that it illuminated, particularly in the Hebrew Bible. And within the first 6 months or so of being at Johns Hopkins, I was an atheist. So,
alrighty then.
26 years. Yeah, so 26 years as an evangelical Christian, and I became a hard atheist at first. Then it stopped mattering to me anything about God or religion, and so I sort of slipped into over the next 6 or 7 years, sort of slipped into agnosticism, just because I wasn't really thinking about it at all. And then when I started when we started our YouTube channel and our social media presence on Digital Hammurabi, that was it became. I sort of felt the need to come to the rescue, honestly, of online atheists and skeptics who I see pretty frequently being picked on and bullied by fundamentalist evangelical Christians or Christian apologists. And it's frustrating to me because often Christian apologists will use the Hebrew Bible or the Greek New Testament. They'll say, you don't know what the Hebrew says, you don't know what the Greek says, and they'll say what they think it says, and they're quite often wrong. And because many atheists, maybe most, don't have the time to
right
sit down and learn these languages, or even the opportunity to do it. What do they say back? And so that's where my book, the latest book, came in. Is trying to help equip atheists and skeptics who are interested in having discussions or even like formal debates with Christian apologists or Christian fundamentalist evangelicals on sort of these hot button issues like slavery or the dating of certain biblical books or prophecy or genocide or any of these topics. What actually does the Old Testament say about them, and how can you equip yourself with the general background to the Old Testament, the ancient world, and then the specific arguments and nuances that are in the text, taking into account the wider ancient Near East and what that has to say about it, so that you can go into these discussions and know what you're saying is correct, and that it has the consensus of biblical scholars and archaeologists and ancient Near Eastern specialists behind you. That's what the book is intended to do. So, but that's the latest one. Just very briefly, then, the first three that we put out, and we thought we self-publish all of them.
Right.
So we get to publish what we want. We're not sort of held by to the needs or wants of another publisher. But that's just so everybody knows. But the first book that we put out was that Learn to Read Ancient Sumerian, and I was very much of the mindset that you were. This is sort of niche, right? This very small set of people are going to be interested in this. But I thought, I spent 8 years of my life learning this language. I might as well. And there really isn't a lot out there for people that aren't already, professionals in Sumerian. I should put something out for the layperson, just anybody who wants to learn Sumerian. And you would not believe the response. It's been a little overwhelming, honestly. So actually, that's an incredibly popular book.
Nice.
Which surprised me. It really did surprise me. But it's great. People get a lot out of it, again, because it's like Learn Sumerian for dummies.
Right.
You need to know English, and that's about it. You don't have to know English grammar. You don't have to know English syntax. You just have to know how to read English in order to learn Sumerian. So it's pretty cool. It's a pretty cool thing. Following that, I wrote the Learning to Pray in a Dead Language, which is a popular publication of my dissertation that I wrote for my PhD. And what's interesting is that what it's about is actually kind of interesting, I think. And
I hope you think so.
People,
right?
Yes. But I think to most people that have read it, because what it does is early in the second millennium BCE in Mesopotamia, the area that I studied, so over there in ancient Iraq, there was students went to school just like they go to school today. And we actually have, like literary texts, stories that we have the actual clay tablets that have these stories on them from that period that talk about, the kid goes to school, his mother packs his lunch, and, he toddles off to school, and he's in class, and his handwriting isn't so good, and so his teacher canes him. And he speaks out of turn, and he gets the answer wrong, and so his teacher canes him, and he goes out in the hall without having a hall pass, and his teacher canes him. And so it tells the story about the student and the life of a student. And it's very interesting because we can actually reconstruct from the Akkadian and Sumerian tablets, clay tablets that we have. Again, these are the originals. These are the ones that the students actually held and wrote on. And you can see their thumbprints in the clay. We can reconstruct the curriculum that they used. And so I go into all of that, how we know it, and what the curriculum was, what a day was like in the life of a student. But then the prayer aspect of it, learning to pray in a dead language is these same students who learned how to read and to write, which was a very small subset actually of the population,
right?
Were the ones that became the priests who were, some of them became priests who were responsible for praying to the multiple deities that they worshiped to keep them calm and to keep them appeased so that they wouldn't be in their, capricious behavior, and their capricious wrath wouldn't destroy the city. And so we have these prayers that the priests would pray, and you can see the connection between what they learned in their schooling and their education, the text that they copied, the text that they memorized, the stories that they learned, and how that affected the way that they prayed and the prayers that they made. And that tradition, last thing I'll say about it, but that tradition ultimately coalesced in like a fixed form in the first millennium. And it's these traditions, it's these stories that were the ones that this religious tradition influenced and was borrowed into the biblical text, into the Old Testament, and of course, built on in the New Testament. And so there's a direct connection between the traditions that we're talking about in the book and those that later coalesced and were developed and used in the Hebrew Bible and ultimately built on in the New Testament, which ultimately come down to us as the bedrock of Western civilization. So I think it's actually pretty neat.
Neat, yeah. I mean, it's one of those things that I could imagine quite enjoying that if I didn't already have a big list of books that I have to read. But yeah,
Understood.
It was interesting because in your new book, The Atheist Handbook to the Old Testament, starts off with, kind of like, what do they call that? Crib notes? No. What are those yellow books that used to?
Yeah. Yeah, that's crib notes, cheap sheets, Cliff Notes.
Thank you. That's what I was going for. Especially chapter 1 was kind of Cliff Notes from creation up to Moses, which wasn't particularly anything new to me, but I could see it being very helpful from a very matter of fact. It's not proselytization. It's not convincing anyone in or out of religion. It's just like this happened and this happened, and this is the basic structure of that part of the Bible, so that someone can get a very good summary of kind of the story and in chapter 1, just like you mentioned in this Sumerian text, a very common story. What do we call this? Aspect, a methodology of having a story where things repeat again and again. So, like you had mentioned in this book, that the student did this and they caned him. The student did this and that teacher caned him. And in the Bible, the people did this, and then God sent a plague. And the people did this,
Yep.
and God sent a plague. And, how much of that is, well, almost none of it, in my opinion, is actually factual, but it's a story element,
Right.
and it's a feature to help the repetition so that the listener of stories that were probably mostly handed orally made it easier to remember what you can and can't do. Did that make any sense at all?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And, to sort of build on it, I think probably the reason that understanding the narrative of the Old Testament, why that's so important, and I talk about this in the introduction of the book, is that so often in these debates, and I feel like I hear it once a week or something similar, an atheist will say to a Christian apologist, look at the story in 1 Samuel 15, where, God tells King Saul to wipe out all the Amalekites, down to the children, the infants, these innocent babies.
Right.
How can you serve a God like that? And without fail, I've yet to hear something different. The Christian apologists will say, well, do you know the context of that? Do you know the context of that story? Do you know who the Amalekites were? And again, without fail, if the atheist or the skeptic doesn't know the story, doesn't know the narrative in that portion of the Pentateuch, well, the debate's over as far as the audience is concerned. And for the most part, anyway.
Possibly. No,
because
it's funny because sometimes I'll debate differently because I know nothing. I mean, I know some things about things, but I would, if I was in that debate, and I've said that as the atheist, and the apologist came back and said, "Did you know the context in the story?" I would be like, "Oh no, please do enlighten us. What is the necessary background to make it appropriate to complete genocide on children? Please go ahead." And I would put the ball back in their court.
The problem, and I hear you, I
Yeah.
think that if you don't know, that's definitely the thing to do. There's no question. But unfortunately, quite often, what the Christian apologist has done is they have structured a response.
Right.
Because often the atheist doesn't know.
Yes.
And the response that they give is often just a little bit off. Right? And so the story they tell back is, look how awful these Amalekites were. My God, they were child sacrificing to Molech, who is this bull altar and the children melted and the drums played and they're screaming, and you go, whoa, 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 whoa. If you don't know that that's bullshit, then what do you say? Oh, well, man, I guess it does sort of create a bit of a problem.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah. One can fall into that trap. Go ahead.
Sure. And I mean, there are things to say back to. There's no question. But what I have found to be the most effective is that if the atheist can say, well, yes, actually, I do know who the Amalekites were. Did you know that the Amalekites did the thing that God called Saul to destroy them for 400 years earlier? Did you know that what they did is that people centuries before had ambushed Israel, two completely different groups of people, and now these people, all this time later, are being massacred down to the babies because of something that was done generations before? Are you cool with that? You cool with people that hadn't done this? Child sex. No. The text is very clear that the reason this is happening is what they did back in Exodus 17. You don't know this story? That's what ends up.
You're right. That
when it's effective.
Yeah, that would be absolutely fantastic. And again, as you point out correctly, that's a lot of the value of this book, because it goes over the history of the ancient Near East, which is fantastic, so the reader can know. Kind of get a granular feel for the time and the place and what was going on and who was who, and having that framework, and of course other chapters. And I don't want to ruin everything for the reader because they got to buy the book to actually get all this fun stuff. Biblical archaeology. Did Moses write the Torah, or and contradictions in the? And I'm going to ask you to say this word. It starts with penta. What's the proper way to say that?
Pentateuch.
Okay, Pentateuch. Prophecy. Talk to me about prophecy, because that's another chapter.
Yeah, so there are two aspects to it that we deal with in this book, and in volume 2, I'm going to go into prophecy proper.
Yeah.
What was prophecy in the ancient Near East, and how did that manifest itself in the Hebrew Bible? But we take two specific, incredibly hot-button issues that show up over and over and over again that revolve around prophecy, and that is the dating of the book of Daniel and the prophecy in Ezekiel 26 against the island city of Tyre. So, the Daniel one probably people are more familiar with if you've read the book of Daniel or you've heard a Christian apologist talk about it. Daniel's supposed to be written in the 6th century, and he prophesies all the kingdoms that are going to come in the future. And how could he make these elaborate predictions that are fulfilled centuries later if God were was not with him? And of course, the point of that chapter is to say, well, actually, the book of Daniel, consensus scholarship absolutely agrees that it's written after all the events that it quote unquote prophesied.
Right.
In the 2nd century. And here's why. And I lay out all the evidence, so all the problems with dating it early, all the historical inaccuracies that show up in the book that definitely should not be there if it's written at that time, but then how unbelievably precise the book is with details, historical details that are in the 2nd century. So it's designed to give the reader all the ammunition that they need if they're going to go in and debate with somebody about the dating of the book of Daniel and the prophecies that are in it. It's sort of a one-stop shop. So that's what the chapter on the book of Daniel does. The other one is, and I'm always sort of floored actually when at how often Christian apologists will bring up the prophecy against the city of Tyre in the book of Ezekiel, and the reason is that it fails. And it fails quite overtly. So the prophecy, just in a nutshell, is Ezekiel says to this island in Phoenicia, this city of Tyre, that's just off the mainland, about 600 yards. It says to it, essentially, here comes Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, the king of the Neo-Babylonian Empire. And he is going to destroy you. The text says he's going to scrape you clean, scrape you bare, like a bare rock. And then the waters are going to come up over top of you and pull you down to the depths. In other words, total destruction.
Yeah, it sounds pretty complete.
And it's very specific and very detailed. But of course, we know from history that didn't happen. Nebuchadnezzar laid siege to the city of Tyre for about 13 years and never got in, which was not unprecedented. There were at least 3 Neo-Assyrian kings from the Neo-Assyrian Empire that did something similar, and they never got in, right? Because it's an island fortress, and I mean it's a big deal to get into it.
Yeah.
And so these 13 years went by. Nebuchadnezzar doesn't get in. Ultimately, the king of Tyre sort of capitulates and pays some tribute, and Nebuchadnezzar goes away. Well, if that's all we had, you might be able to say, well, but Ezekiel in chapter 29 says, actually, Nebuchadnezzar didn't get in, and he tried really, really hard, but he failed. And so instead, God is going to give him Egypt. And instead of Tyre, God's going to give him Egypt, which we don't go into in the book, but of course that prophecy fails as well. But the point is that this one gets brought out by Christian apologists so often because they say, look how precise it is. And you say, but it failed. And what they say is, it doesn't fail because it's not just talking about Nebuchadnezzar, the Neo-Babylonian king. It's also talking about Alexander the Great, who actually did break into Tyre. And so the prophecy is actually about him getting in, some 200 years later. And so what I do in the book is not only talk about how Nebuchadnezzar failed, but I go into great detail as to how Nebuchadnezzar is the only one that's being prophesied about, and that Alexander the Great is nowhere to be found in that prophecy. So we go into painstaking detail at times to show how it actually is a failed prophecy. And that's not just my opinion. That the consensus of both liberal, quote unquote, biblical scholars and evangelical, very conservative scholars will all say Nebuchadnezzar was the one that was supposed to take it, and he fails to do so. They just have a different theological answer for why that is.
And it's funny because I have two thoughts in my head right here. One is that everything I've learned about Nebuchadnezzar may have come from VeggieTales, and I'm starting to think that's not sufficient.
Well, it's probably pretty close. It's close enough. Close enough.
The other one is I'm really getting this feel that you are doing something kind of like I'm doing, and I may be giving myself too much credit. So let me explain. That you've studied this very detailed, very academic, and in a way that the average person will never be able to do. But then you're able to kind of, forgive me, dumb it down a little bit so that the person who reads this can get the background, some of the details, and a feel and a flavor for it, just like I am always desperately try to explain how investing works without getting buried too much in the weeds, which I could do.
Right.
You could have written a very academic, and you have written very academic works about this, but this book in particular is for somebody who can know a lot or somebody who can know literally nothing about the Bible and sit down with this or sit down and listen to it and be like, oh, I didn't know that. And it gives a flavor and ties in a lot of different cultures around and before the time of Christianity, and how it all kind of plays into each other. And we had very beginning in this interview where stories and patterns and cultural norms were borrowed by the authors and the rewriters and the creators hundreds of years later of different parts of the Bible, because that's what people did back then.
That's right. Yeah, and the thing that I am very thankful for, to whom I'm not the universe, I guess, is that circumstances in life have afforded me the opportunity to get all this education. Like, I spent 15 years in grad school,
right?
And it wasn't, like lazy 15 years. It was, they were very rigorous years.
15 years of Animal House. Is that what you had?
not quite. But the nice thing about it is what I've learned, I guess, over time, and I'm sure that you feel the same way about it when it comes to like investments, is that people that don't know the topic incredibly well will often, when they try to explain it, they don't make it very clear because they can't dumb it down. Because in order to dumb something down, and because I like how that sounds, you have to know the nuances. And so I'm very thankful that I've had all these opportunities to be able to do this, because the book is specifically intended to arm or equip the person that as you say, has no training in this, and to do it in such a way that the language that I use in the book, the layout, and even honestly, that Megan, my wife, is the one that does all the editing, and she specifically made it so that there's, the font that she used, there's a little extra spacing, that you don't see, and it's because it's easier on the eyes to read. It's easier to consume because you get through a page faster, and I think psychologically that makes it easier to consume it because you can get through the material faster, the page faster, which just feels good. Anyway, that's the way the book is laid out. I use a lot of popular culture references. I think the introduction opens with a scene from Star Trek, First Contact, between Lily Sloan and Jean-Luc Picard. So that's the way it's designed. It's designed to be fun. It's designed to be very down to earth, but yet give end notes, give bibliography. So I explain it in a way that you get it. If you just want to stop there, you get what I'm saying, hopefully. But if you really want to dig deeper into any of these aspects, the bibliography is there and the sources are there, and they're reputable sources. So that you don't have to think to yourself, well, is this some fringe scholar here that he's citing, or is this a reputable guy? No, they're all reputable scholars.
Yeah. And of course, we've had so much fun. We're way over our minimum of 20 minutes, which is fine. We can keep going.
Right.
But the thing I really want to jump to, chapter 6, did the Bible endorse slavery? Yes or no? Can you do that? Can you do yes or no? Thumbs up, thumbs down, Caesar style?
Yes, absolutely, without question, it did.
And we're not talking about 7 years of work, or debtor slave, or debtor prison, or someone who's just a manservant that works in your house for 7 years and then gets to go free, right? Is that something different?
Oh, I mean, it certainly does endorse that, but it endorses that would be, just simple, not simple, but I guess simple, fine. That's debt slavery.
Yeah.
Right? It's slavery that's contingent upon a debt. Now, be like the way that maybe you probably didn't intend it that way, but I mean, the way that came across was like it wasn't so bad.
Yeah.
Debt slavery was bad.
I'm being the apologist, which I love the fact that it has the word apology.
I see. I gotcha.
Has the word apology in it, but they're making these excuses that it's different then. It's not really so bad. People were better off being slaves.
Yeah, I mean, just ask them.
Yeah.
If you read Jeremiah 34, for example, go read it and see what it is that the prophet is saying about it. Because I mean, here you've got people that are being kept as debt slaves. They're just being kept longer, and boy, it's a horrid thing. The prophet is disgusted with the people and reprimands them. They're not supposed to be doing this. And of course, if you go to like Leviticus 25, ultimately in the end, the Israelites aren't allowed to keep their fellow Israelites as debt slaves. It's not a good thing, right? It's you know what it's like to them, and I'm strictly speaking from their vantage point. To them, debt slavery would have been bad, quote unquote, in the same way that loans would have been bad, or being in debt to someone else would have been bad. It's not that there was this moral thing that was tied to it, because I don't think there was. What I think is being tied to it is it's not a good thing to owe someone money. Like, it's not an immoral thing to owe someone money. It's just not good.
Right.
We don't. It's not immoral to have your arm broken, but it's not good. Like, you don't like it. It's not the ideal situation to be in. But no, I mean that's the Old Testament is painfully clear in the legal sections, and not just in practice, not just what the sinful people did or whatever that Christian apologists often try to say. It's in the law collections. It's in what God is endorsing, and so it endorses debt slavery, it endorses chattel slavery, it endorses sex slavery. There's just no question about those things.
Yeah.
And that those things are not, and this is to the surprise, I think, of many people, those things are not in dispute among both, again, liberal, quote-unquote, scholars and conservative evangelical scholars. Everybody agrees. It's in the biblical text. It's in the law collections.
Yeah.
It is endorsed.
I think it'd be an interesting book. I don't know if you'd want to write it because you've already got ideas and themes of future books, but from the founding of America until the Civil War, a book about the Christian endorsement of slavery and how ministers and priests and the people use the Bible again and again and again to promote the idea, to support the idea, to endorse the idea that, of course, slavery is okay because here it is in the Bible. Because so many people today, there's this weird arc of history, fantasy in America that we have been maybe sometimes slow to move forward, but we always move forward and we always do better. And often all those better things are caused by Christians, and they just really don't have a basic understanding of the history and who's done what within their own country, even 150 years ago.
Yeah, no, I don't, I don't deal in the new book, in the chapter on slavery, with what Christians utilized specifically when it came to arguing for or against slavery. But what I do is I address the very common apologetic, and it's something that I didn't deal with in my other book that I wrote on Did the Old Testament Endorse Slavery. This is something new in the book, in the new book, in the chapter, and that is that sort of trope that, slavery in the Old Testament, let's just get it right off the table. It's nothing like slavery in the antebellum South. right? And you hear that all the time.
Yeah.
And I got to thinking after a while. Well, I'm not an early American history expert, but I know how to wade through secondary literature, so let me do that. And I did a bit of research into the laws as they were, in the legal rationale for those laws as they developed in the antebellum South. And I won't give too much, because I think it'd be too much detail here. But essentially, what you see is the legal rationale that these judges utilized when asking the question, for example, can a master beat his slave? And how do we set up this law, these laws in the antebellum South, to keep masters having the ability to beat their slaves, to motivate them to work, but how to mitigate abuse and murder of a slave? And the legal rationale that you see is, in my opinion, almost identical with the legal rationale that is seen in passages like Exodus 21:20-21. So just very, very briefly, in Exodus 21, the legal rationale here is that, well, obviously a master has to be able to beat a slave with a wooden rod,
right?
Because how else are you going to motivate them? But they are not allowed to abuse them, overtly abuse them, or murder them. And so if they murder them, if the master murders his slave, then he's to be killed, probably. But if the slave dies after a day or two, if there's some intervening period of time, well, then it's assumed that this was just moderate correction, and so there is no punishment. Well, when you read through the judges in the antebellum South and what they say about this, I think people will be surprised to read things like, "No good Christian will abuse his slave. It's unbecoming of a Christian to abuse and murder his slave. And if you murder your slave, it's like, the penalty is if you murdered a free white person." Well, I read that and went, wow, that's shocking to me, because of the atrocities that we saw.
Right.
But of course, it makes sense when you think about it, because it creates this gigantic series of loopholes for masters in the South to be able to jump through. Because who's going to come and say that was abuse? And we have to have another master, right? Another slave owner come and testify, quite often, that was abuse. Well, who's going to do that?
Yeah.
What jury of free white people is going to convict a guy for abusing and killing a slave, murdering a slave? It happened, but just not all that often.
Yeah.
But the laws themselves were designed to mitigate abuse.
Absolutely. If someone wants to have you come speak at a conference or a different podcast or YouTube channel, or if they've just got questions about the book, how can people reach you?
Yeah, if you just search Joshua Bowen, Bowen, either in Amazon, or you could probably do it just on Google and type in like Joshua Bowen Bible or something, I'll probably come up. We have a website, Digital Hammurabi, that's HAMMURABI.com, or our YouTube channel is also Digital Hammurabi. But if you search on any of those things, you'll find us. You can email us. My wife runs the channel, runs everything. I'm speaking actually at a conference out in Fort Wayne, Indiana in October 9th and 10th. It's called, it's hosted by the Atheist Network Group, TANG, and it's called Better, BETTER, so doing things, having better conversations, just like what we're talking about here, having better conversations, more productive conversations. So I'll be speaking there. Seth Andrews will be speaking there, Anthony Magnavosco. I can't think of the others now, but several other speakers.
Did you say that
McDonald,
Fort Wayne, Indiana?
Yeah.
Oh my God, I'll have to check that out because I can get there. Would you, if you can, be kind enough to send me a link? I'll add it to the show notes, and of
Absolutely.
course I'll double check my calendar and just come hang with everybody. So I'm glad I asked these questions. And will you promise me? Will you try to come back on when you release Volume 2?
I promise. Absolutely. This was great.
When do you
Really
expect it to be done?
So we just, Megan just gave birth to twins at the end of May. So there are a lot of sleepless nights at the time. I'm plugging away at the chapter on the Exodus and the conquest and the archaeological evidence behind those two things. So I'm plugging away at it, but I have a full-time job, and with these babies, it's been slow. But I hope by next year is the plan, 2022 release.
Excellent. Well, Joshua Bowen, thank you so much for spending a few minutes, wink, wink, nudge, nudge, on the Phil Ferguson Show. I greatly appreciate it.
Well, it's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Once again, I failed miserably with the goal of having shows that are about an hour. This is probably going to be an hour and a half with all the content that we have here. So maybe that makes up for the fact that I can't seem to get one done every week like I desire. It's now 10 to 14 days between episodes. My apologies. If you really want them more often, I am terribly sorry. It takes a good chunk of time, and I'm delightfully busy. So that's a good thing. If you like the show, you can go to patreon.com/Phil and become a patron to the show, as little as $1 per episode. Note, it's not per week or per month, it's per episode, so you only kick in a few bucks when a show is put out. Occasionally, I might make an investment announcement or an idea change, and I might give that to patrons first, although formally, you don't get a fucking thing by being a patron. There's no book, there's no perks other than maybe this idea. I have done it once, and I might do it again. But really, the patron page is a nice way for you to say that you appreciate what I do, that the time that I spend on this is valuable enough that you listen and you kick in $1 or more. You can always kick in more. The top tier is $6.66 if you're so inclined. And of course, thank you to all the people that have signed up in the last week or so since I last thanked people. It's always an honor, and I'm delighted and humbled by the fact that people are willing to cough up $1 or $2 or $6.66 per episode. Thank you very much for that. The other thing you can do if you don't have the funds to become a patron, or if you just don't want to be a patron, or you're a patron, you can do this as an additional thing. Leave a review for the podcast. The two places I know of are Stitcher and Apple Podcast. You can go there, and when I meet somebody, this happened to me in the before time, before COVID, I was talking to somebody and gave them my card, and we started talking about my podcast, and they pulled out their iPhone and went to Podcast Player and saw all of the 5-star reviews there, and I'm like, oh my God, this is a legitimate show. I don't know when it becomes me just fucking around and it transfers to legitimate, but a couple hundred 5-star reviews, I guess, is what did it for them. So it's something that's out there, and I know I'm approaching something like 2 million listens over the years, but that's become such a fucking game because the show used to get 25 to 30,000 listens, and now it gets 5,000 listens because Spreaker, which is the original hosting source of my podcast, keeps changing the way they count listens, and every time they change the rules, the numbers go down. And I think I understand that they want to make the advertisers much more confident that when they're paying for listens, they're getting the entire show. But I don't know behind the curtain how that actually works. I'm not really that concerned. I make the show because I enjoy it. I make the show because other people enjoy it. And when people leave those 5-star reviews or contribute at Patreon, you become a patron at Patreon. All of that is greatly appreciated. There's my rambling way of using more words than is necessary. So, going to wrap up the show. Oh, I almost forgot. Because it came up as a topic, I hope to soon have more information about the event in Fort Wayne. I think it was October we talked about in the interview. And hopefully I can get one of the organizers or another speaker or two from that conference to come. Fort Wayne, Indiana, of course, is probably, I think I can get there in 3 hours from the South Chicago suburbs. So there's a good chance that I definitely want to go. And there's a good chance that I'll go if people who live in Indiana don't fuck it all up a la COVID from my rant way back when in the intro of the show. So I'm going to wrap up And I do hope that this shit all gets under control and we can meet somewhere in person. Until then, ciao.